Welcome, everyone. I am Anna McLaughlin. I'm the program director for Transportation Program Management here at AASHTO, and I'm really happy to welcome you all to webinar 80 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series, sponsored by FHWA and AASHTO's Performance Management Technical Service Program. If you are at a state that participates in this TSP, you are what allows us to bring these webinars to you every month, and we appreciate your participation. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Today's webinar will feature a thoughtful dialogue between leaders in asset management, reflecting how the discipline has changed over the years, what has worked, and what agencies have struggled to translate agencies have struggled to translate concepts into lasting organizational change. We're all in good company today because we have presented webinars in this series every 2 months, going back to 2012, on a variety of topics in asset management. And we're excited to add today's webinar to the series. I get to tell you about my favorite website, where you can go for more information about the webinar series. You can visit tam-portal.com. That's TAM, TAM-portal.com. From there, you can click on events in the main menu to register for any upcoming webinars. You can also find archives of previous webinar recordings, downloadable slides, and other valuable resources. Video and slides from today's webinar will also be posted on the page, so you'll be able to refer back to it. We are always open to any suggestions you have for future webinar topics. You can either reach out directly or you can put them in the chat today in the webinar. Also in the chat, if you have questions for our presenters and our panel, you can put those in the chat feature as well. We'll do our best to address questions during the panelist discussion at the end. But right now, at that time at the end, we will invite participants to unmute, ask their questions, or share their perspectives. Until then, we hope you'll be careful to keep your audio connection muted. So if you haven't already, please be sure to mute your audio so that we don't interrupt our presenters today. Thank you for that. Before handing it over to Hannah, I just want to note that our FHWA partners were unable to join us today. But as always, we sincerely appreciate their collaboration in our mutual commitment to sharing knowledge and advancing the state of the practice. Thank you, FHWA. And now I am going to turn it over to Hiana to go over our webinar objectives and our agenda, and to kick it off with our speaker and our panelists. Thanks, Hiana.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Anna. So I'm Hiana Park with Spy Pump Partners. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are to first learn from Katie's insights from her TAM experience throughout her career, feature practitioners' responses, reactions to Katie's presentation, highlight asset management victories and ongoing difficulties at agencies around the country, identify next steps, including ways to continue integrating asset management across organizational silos, and as always, share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community. Many of us were fortunate to hear Katie Zimmerman's keynote at the TAM conference in Chicago last August. Her talk inspired us to think about how transportation asset management can not only survive, but thrive in an era of rapid technological change, workforce transitions, funding uncertainty, and growing resilience challenges. We asked Katie to deliver her keynote again so that those who could not be in Chicago could benefit from it and have the recording for future TAM professionals to view. After Katie's presentation, we have a panel of current TAM leaders who will share their perspectives in response to Katie's talk. So those TAM practitioners include Jamie Kovalik from Delaware DOT, Justin Bruner from Pennsylvania DOT, Matt Verstahl from the Washington State DOT, Mike Rossi from the New York State DOT, and Virginia Stubella from the New Mexico DOT. These are all the TAM leads from those states. Time permitting, we'll have an open group discussion at the end. Just another reminder, if you have a thought, a comment, or a question, please use the chat feature at any time during the webinar. We'll do our best to cover them at the end, but we'll also open it up if we have time at the end. All right, so we will now hear from our keynote presenter, Katie Zimmerman. Katie has spent the past 40 plus years helping public and private transportation agencies make effective decisions to manage their infrastructure assets. Katie recently retired as the founder and executive vice president at Applied Pavement Technology. Katie has authored or contributed to most of the guide documents currently in use to shape the application of asset management principles, including both the asset management and the pavement management guides published by AASHTO and other resources published by FHWA. She has assisted several agencies with the development of their asset management plans and served as chair of the TRB Committee on Asset Management for 6 years. Over the years, she valued the opportunities she had to work with the asset management community in a variety of roles. Over to you, Katie.
All right. Thanks, Yana. It was really an honor last summer to have been asked to open up the 15th National Conference on Transportation Asset Management. I chose a theme of resilience for my presentation because I think this is something that's on everyone's mind these days, especially in light of the increasing frequency and the intensity of weather events that are making asset management more challenging than ever. But rather than focus on how resilience is impacting the way we're managing assets, I thought it might be worthwhile to focus on the practice of asset management itself, using what we know about resilience to question whether we've built a sustainable practice that's resilient enough to survive in today's geopolitical climate. Today's leaders are dealing with all kinds of things. They've got political uncertainties, funding uncertainties, rapid changing in the technology that's available, changes in the way their workplaces are operating, and huge losses in institutional knowledge. Any one of these things could easily put an end to or significantly alter asset management practices as we know them today. So I thought it would be interesting to evaluate the asset management process itself in terms of its ability to continue functioning as our way of doing business, in spite of all the uncertainties in the world around us. But maybe more importantly, I'm not just curious as to whether or not asset management will survive in the next decade. I was especially interested in thinking about what might be needed so asset management does more than survive. I was curious as to what might be needed to ensure that it actually thrives in the next decade. At the conference, we did a little exercise where we had people who were at the conference for the first time. Everyone stood up, and then we asked people that were at the conference for the first time to sit down. And a large percentage of the audience sat down. We then had people that had been up to 5 conferences sit, and lasted with people that had been there 5 to 10 years or longer. And one of the things we recognized from that activity was that there was a large group of newcomers. And with that, that brings a lot of new knowledge and enthusiasm into our profession. And that should have a tremendous influence on how asset management thrives in the next decade. I think that the energy of these new practitioners is going to provide a lot of opportunity to make better use of technology since they haven't been entrenched in the older way of doing business, and they're likely to find very creative and effective ways to manage assets. At the other end of the spectrum, though, the dwindling number of seasoned practitioners may also introduce some challenges with the loss of historical context and years of practical experience. This has the potential for their replacements to have an over-reliance on data and analysis results without really understanding their limitations. It's possible that previously discarded strategies will be repeated simply because the context for how prior decisions were made is no longer known within the agency. So, while repeating past mistakes can be damaging or inefficient, perhaps even more threatening for a transportation agency is the possibility that inexperienced practitioners might not understand or might not recognize potential risks. From an asset management perspective, this could be a significant issue, especially if inexperience leads to regulatory or safety issues or unexpected negative long-term impacts on system performance. I heard one practitioner caution that it's not about making mistakes, since everyone makes mistakes at some point. The more serious issue is not even realizing the potential for making mistakes. In the 2025 TRB conference, I went to a session in which DOT directors and HR directors talked about this issue. They recognized the changes that are taking place in the workforce and noted that a key is going to be figuring out how to build institutional knowledge at a faster rate than has happened in the past. We don't have time to let people get their feet wet and build their skills over time. Today, newer staff are being put in the positions of responsibility much earlier in their careers. And that creates the challenge to figure out how to quickly transfer critical knowledge from one generation to another, so these new practitioners have the skills necessary to avoid any serious long-term consequences. One of the things we need to recognize is that the concept of managing the transportation network from a systems perspective wasn't even introduced until the mid to late 1970s and early 80s. Early adopters and innovators were limited in terms of their ability to put ideas into practice by the absence of the tools and technology needed to analyze complex problems. Problems such as optimizing the use of available funds across multiple assets, subject to a series of constraints. I had the privilege of being friends with one of those early innovators, Fred Finn. He retired in Monticello, Illinois, which is a town very close to Champaign-Urbana, where I live. I asked Fred how he and his peers were able to turn their ideas about managing assets from a systems perspective into reality. And he said that there were two success factors that made the difference. The first was being able to bring people together with different areas of specialization and expertise to solve what was a multidisciplinary problem. The first computerized management systems for pavements were developed by a team that included a pavement engineer who was familiar with pavement conditions and performance, but also a statistician who was familiar with model development, an expert in optimization theory, a programmer, and a database manager. The second success factor was their ability to build buy-in among agency personnel who were used to a very different way of doing their jobs, so that the models and analysis results were accepted. They did this by going out into the field to compare district project lists generated by their usual methods with the outputs from the computerized analysis. The buy-in was critical to the acceptance of the analysis tool because it demonstrated that reasonable results could be generated, results that could be used to support decision processes. Although Fred didn't talk about it, I think there was a third success factor that's worth noting, and that's the transformation that was starting to take place in terms of technology in the 1980s. When I started my career 40 years ago, desktop computers were just coming into existence, and most organizations had a couple of computers. They certainly didn't have one on everyone's desk or in their pockets. But as technology evolved and computers became more accepted and affordable, suddenly practitioners had access to desktop tools that could analyze network level needs in a matter of hours instead of days, weeks, or months needed by a mainframe computer. Because of the contributions of these innovators and the foresight of key people at the Federal Highway Administration, AASHTO, and TRB, I think asset management has a strong foundation from which to build on. Since the first AASHTO Transportation Asset Management Guide was published back in 2002, we've had foundational principles that guide asset management. Since 2012, with the requirements for state DOTs and transit agencies to develop asset management plans, we've seen asset management practices evolve from siloed systems concerned only with the need of one asset to a more sophisticated, risk-based analysis that considers the condition and performance needs of the entire system to achieve an agency's strategic long-term objectives. In many agencies, asset management is considered standard practice in terms of identifying cost-effective investment decisions. In several cases, asset management has moved up to fairly high levels within DOT organizations, rising from the engineering levels up to department level asset management offices or divisions, or asset management committees that might be chaired by executive level personnel. We're also seeing asset management as a cross-cutting activity within an organization, with participation and input from planners, programmers, engineers, finance, field personnel, data analysts, and so many others. All of these foundational pieces provide a strong structure from which asset management can grow. Now, I don't know how asset management is going to evolve over the next decade, but with a good foundation and a frank assessment of what's needed to make asset management more resilient, I want to offer you some ideas for how I think asset management can adapt to a changing, complex world and remain useful in supporting the types of decisions that have to be made when managing a transportation system in the face of uncertainty. Since the theme of my presentation is the resilience of asset management, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with what that means. The FHWA defines resilience as the ability of a transportation system to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions, and to withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions. To be able to adapt to changing conditions, an agency has to anticipate risks and vulnerabilities so they can develop strategies that prepare them for unexpected events. Those strategies have to consider all possibilities, including being able to withstand the changing conditions, respond to them, and minimize the recovery time to return system performance to an operational condition. When considering the resilience of asset management as a practice, I wanted to use similar concepts. I came up with 7 factors that I think will be important to asset management over the next 10 years, especially if we're looking for it not to just survive, but to thrive. Within each area, I assessed both our current strength and the perceived urgency in terms of low, medium, and high. I'll also highlight some of the strengths and weaknesses in each area. Now, keep in mind, this assessment is entirely based on my perceptions. It would definitely benefit from the input of others, as we're going to be doing today. So the first of my area is technological adaptability, our ability to adapt to new technology. There's so much data available today and so many new ways of being able to collect the data. Are we prepared to take advantage of the new technology? Are DOTs nimble enough to adopt new technologies in a timely fashion? Can we make use of new technologies like AI and machine learning to process the data quickly and in a meaningful way? Will there be new sources of data that will require us to think about data access and ownership? And as systems become more connected, will agencies become increasingly vulnerable to cybersecurity threats? I think our current strength is relatively low, primarily because of the lack of nimbleness to evaluate and adapt new technology. But I think the urgency is high. I think the availability of technology is our primary strength in this area. But I think the speed with which innovations are adopted, the potential conflicts and system compatibility are limited ability to turn data into useful information, and the fact that we'll have to deal with new influences such as cybersecurity threats, data ownership issues, and things like that are some of the weaknesses in this particular area. The second area I identified is economic stability. Asset management is dependent on the data that agencies collect regularly and the availability of analysis tools to compare long-term impacts of different strategies. Asset management is vulnerable to shifts in funding, not only funding to support system preservation, but also funding to maintain the data and analysis tools. Without the ability to show a return on investment for these efforts, there is a real possibility that agencies won't continue to fund data collection at today's levels. What happens to our ability to forecast consequences if we don't have reliable data to drive decisions? Another consideration is that right now there's a strong focus on preserving existing assets because there just isn't enough funding to keep expanding the system. So with the focus on lifecycle planning, agencies are evaluating long-term strategies that reduce lifecycle costs of maintaining transportation assets. But what if that shift changes? What if there's a return to more low-cost, short-term options that have lower construction costs, but lead to higher lifecycle costs in the long run? Do we have ways to convince decision makers that focusing on long-term strategies is the better choice? In this area, I identified the strength as medium. I think there's a strong focus on system preservation right now, and the current requirements for asset management plans and transportation performance management support the need for data. But I do think it's vulnerable and very dependent on what's included in future transportation bills. So we may have to come back and revisit this particular rating. I also set the urgency at medium because I think we're in a good place with data collection right now. But if the focus starts to change, that priority might shift to high. I did identify the increased focus on the preservation and lifecycle planning as a strength in this area. But again, that inability to quantify a return on investment for asset management and our vulnerability to shifts in agency priorities and sound lifecycle strategies to more short-term strategies, those are two of our weaknesses. The third area was environmental resilience. With increases in the number and intensity of storms, asset management is a valuable tool for assessing asset vulnerabilities and using that information to set investment priorities that enhance system resilience. Asset management offers critical support to DOTs in recovery efforts following natural disasters, including providing the inventory and work history data that might be needed to support reimbursement claims to FEMA or other organizations. So will the focus on these efforts increase over the next decade, resulting in an increased use of asset management? Or will it shift to some other priority, perhaps shifting priorities away from asset management? One area of weakness is the lack of any formal consideration of environmental factors in network-level analysis models. We've seen progress in project-level models, but we haven't seen a lot of success in modeling resilience and sustainability at the network level. Because of these factors, I put us right now, our strengths in terms of medium. Right now, resilience seems to be a priority, and there's a lot of good work being done in terms of assessing vulnerabilities and prioritizing enhancements to vulnerable assets. But in the years since I gave this presentation, there have been a lot of changes at the government level. And I think maybe the urgency could shift from what I had as medium to maybe even a little bit higher. I think we're in a good place, but there is still work to be done, and I hope that it can continue at a reasonable pace. So the strengths in this area are the incorporation of resilience into asset management plans, the fact that some states are doing resilience plans to identify their vulnerabilities. There were protect funds available to address resilience priorities, and the completeness of some of the inventories to support reimbursement claims are all strengths. But in terms of weaknesses, the political nature of the topic in today's environment and its potential impact on funding could make us a lot more vulnerable. There's also a lack of formal consideration of environmental factors in network level analysis models that is a weakness. And I've identified that challenges with convincing decision makers to invest in strategies to improve system resilience as a weakness in this area also. The fourth area is workforce and knowledge continuity. I've already talked about the importance of transferring knowledge from one generation to another, especially as newer practitioners are being given increasing responsibility early in their careers. From what I've seen, few agencies have documented their practices in ways that would enable someone new to get up to speed quickly. That begs the question of whether there might be more effective ways of capturing the knowledge so it's more available in digestive quantities when it's most needed. I know that there are some studies underway to evaluate asset management workforce needs, and I'm really hopeful that these efforts will lead to innovative strategies for building a workforce that can adapt to asset management programs with confidence as the needs change. I put our current strength in this area as low. So even though there are a lot of resources out there, I rated it low primarily because the material isn't always packaged in a way that serves our needs. But I put the urgency as high. I noted in the strengths that there is some documentation of practice in place, and things like the online asset management guide are very valuable assets to us. And there are some more formalized processes in place now because the asset management plan development has required them to document existing practices. But we still have a number of weaknesses that we have to deal with. They include a lack of innovative ways to accelerate skill building processes, the lack of just-in-time training materials or simulated situations that build problem-solving skills. And there's vulnerability of funding and a lack of experience with potential traps or vulnerabilities. Area number 5 is agency policy and governance alignment. Over the years, I've heard people say that since the ICE-T mandate from 1991 that required state DOTs to implement pavement and bridge management systems was repealed, funding and support for data collection and software has become more vulnerable. In 2012, MAP 21 re-emphasized the importance of pavement and bridge management systems to support the development of state DOT asset management plans. But again, these requirements are vulnerable to political forces in Congress and could be removed in subsequent transportation bills. So how can we keep the focus on performance-based management and the use of asset management to support investment decisions? Some agencies have embedded asset management into policies, ensuring that it remains the way investment decisions are made. We should be asking whether our current analysis tools are aligned with leadership priorities or whether there are changes that are needed. We might also question whether the outputs from these systems are effective at communicating why long-term strategies are so beneficial. Governance alignment also speaks to the challenges associated with the coordination required between state and local owners of the national highway system. When pressed, most MPOs will admit that their NHS projects typically aren't driven by pavement and bridge condition. Rather, the focus tends to be more on safety and mobility concerns. But as several state DOTs have demonstrated, by providing useful asset management information to MPOs, states can have a bit of an influence on regional priorities to address shared needs. I rated this area as a current strength as high. I think we're in a strong position right now, and I hope asset management continues to be a priority in future authorizations. But I also noted that urgency as high so that we keep the focus on performance-based planning and programming and the use of asset management to support decisions. In terms of strength, I think the use of performance-based planning and programming processes in support of asset management is a key strength. The use of asset management systems to support the preparation of asset management plans and those requirements that we use those systems are definitely strengths. And the adoption of asset management policies in some agencies is definitely a strength. But again, we're vulnerable to policy shifts, which could change priorities and affect asset management dramatically. I think that we also have ineffective methods of communicating the long-term benefits of asset preservation, which leads us to possibly fall prey to some of the short-term strategies that elected officials might be interested in. And there's also some weakness in the coordination with local NHS owners. The sixth factor that I think is important to the resilience of asset management as a practice is stakeholder buy-in and public value. We've all heard instances in which a member of the public questions why a DOT or other agency is spending time and money on an asset in good condition when there are so many other assets that have greater need. This is just an example of the public not understanding the purpose of a preservation treatment. But when we illustrate the concept in terms that they're familiar with, like taking care of a house or a car, they can understand the concept. But it illustrates that knowledge of asset management principles is not generally understood. I think the public underestimates the value and benefits that transportation agencies provide, and I think that's reflected in the limited funding available to support asset management. There are several calculators that are available to estimate what the typical driver pays in gas taxes each year. And this was, again, a year before gas price changes have taken place. But on average, depending on mileage, fuel efficiency, and tax rates, the average driver was paying between $141 and $398 per year in fuel tax towards highway maintenance. Now that's nothing. I don't know about you, but even with the Senior Citizen Unlimited program at Verizon, I'm paying more than that each year for my phone bill. It might benefit the long-term viability of asset management to find ways to raise the value of transportation to the public. One of the other things we've realized in the past few years is that many of the performance measures we use to drive investments have inherent bias towards car users. Think about some of the measures we use, like vehicle miles traveled or number of vehicles on poor roads. Each of these is looking at conditions based on users rather than community needs. Now, when you're identifying pavement or bridge needs, it makes sense to use conditions and vehicle usage as the primary drivers for treatment decisions. But when we manage assets from a system perspective, we have to consider other local priorities that might influence the work that's done, such as the availability of sidewalks, bike paths, and pedestrian crossing islands, to name a few. Our current tools don't do a very good job of supporting these types of analyses. So based on these factors, I rated our current strength as medium and our urgency as medium. In terms of strength, I think there are some promotional materials available on the benefits of asset management, but they're somewhat limited. Also, the fact that asset management principles can be easily related to the public, I think, is a definite strength that we could take advantage of. But there are also some weaknesses in this area. Generally, people are not aware of asset management practices or the values that they bring. There's also inadequate funding for transportation due in part because people underestimate its value. I think that there's also a limited ability to consider some of the broader transportation needs in asset management planning and in our analysis tool that will need to be addressed to keep us viable. Lastly, we need to consider the flexibility of the data and the tools that we're using in support of asset management. The pavement and bridge management systems that are in use today are complex tools with models that allow us to predict changes in conditions over time. We can apply rules for different types of treatments that are needed over an analysis period. We can calculate the cost of the treatments that are going to be needed. We can summarize network conditions for a variety of budget scenarios. But from what I've seen, many new practitioners don't have the familiarity and the confidence with these tools to be able to change the models. So they're hesitant to do any type of analysis that's outside the norm. Unfortunately, if asset management is going to be able to thrive, we're going to have to be able to adapt to shifts in funding, treatment types, construction practices, traffic shifts, automated vehicles, and other types of changes. And pavement and bridge managers are going to need to be able to adjust their models accordingly. On the other hand, we have to recognize that not all agencies need the same level of sophistication to accommodate their needs. In Indiana and Michigan, for example, local agencies are either encouraged or mandated to develop very simple asset management plans that outline planned improvements that will be made. Now, these plans aren't nearly as complex as the asset management plans that state DOTs are putting together every 4 years, but they're a step towards encouraging the use of asset management at the local level. The Brookings Institute estimates that 75% of the roads in the US are managed by local agencies. So anything we can do to encourage their use of asset management practices is sure to benefit them and to promote asset management practices. I rated our current strength in this area as medium, and the priority is high. In terms of strengths, I noted the availability and the use of the management systems to analyze condition, and how that is becoming much more common than it was in the past. And I also noted some initiatives in some of the states to support local agency pavement or asset management practices. But in terms of weaknesses, there is some inability or hesitation to adapt the models within our management systems to changing conditions. Perhaps the complexity of these systems limit their agility or their ability to adapt to some degree. And another weakness that I identified is that helping local agencies by coordinating efforts with state DOTs is something that I think that there's some room for improvement. So from my analysis, I identified these 4 high priority areas from the 7 where I think we need to focus our attention to ensure that asset management doesn't just survive, it can actually thrive over the next decade. Here are my suggestions for moving forward in no particular order. First, technological adaptability. We have to be more nimble in terms of adapting to new technology so we can take advantage of the opportunities available and keep asset management relevant in a changing world. I think we need to get outside of our comfort zone and take a chance on new innovations and new ways of looking at traditional practices. A key to that is building a culture that encourages practitioners to take calculated risks that are evaluated against potential rewards, monitored over time, and adjustments made based on what's working and what isn't. Within this culture, failures should be viewed as lessons learned rather than reasons to end a practice or punish an employee. I would love to see agencies reward employees for taking these calculated risks rather than have them do the same thing over and over again just because it's the way we've always done it. In this area, it also means being able to quickly assess and evaluate which technologies make sense and how to best use the data that's generated from the technology. There's a very good chance that the assets that we're going to have to manage in the future are going to look quite different from those we're managing today. Perhaps they'll be less tangible and more virtual or digital. In the future, asset management will have to be able to account for communication networks, systems to facilitate charging stations, non-contact vehicle charging stations, and so much more. We need to think about what data and tools are going to be needed to support the management of those kinds of assets. Tools like AI and machine learning show promise for analyzing and making sense out of large amounts of data, but we have to use those tools wisely. I recently heard a story about how an AI tool that was touted as being the equivalent to a PhD couldn't correctly label the 50 states on a map. Now, I found AI tools to be very helpful, and a recent conference on our recent peer exchange provided some really good information on how we might be able to use these tools to generate presentations in very creative and effective ways. In my mind, this is going to be critical for asset management's future. But we also can't just use the results from these tools blindly. Just as we do quality checks on condition data provided by contractors before we put it in our management systems, we have to retain sufficient organizational knowledge to know whether the answers we're getting are good or bad. We also have to be able to use the data to communicate more effectively. In a recent peer exchange, we were given a lot of information about generative AI, communication strategies, and data visualization techniques. We've got to get smarter about using these tools. Now, I'm an engineer, so I can say this, but the way we as engineers typically present information to decision makers, elected officials, and the public just isn't very useful. It can't be grasped quickly, and it isn't compelling. We need to involve people who understand communication to help us tell our story more effectively if we want asset management to thrive. The second area to consider is system flexibility. To remain relevant, we're going to need analysis tools that allow practitioners to easily assess potential changes that can be analyzed. I've seen this as a challenge over and over again as agencies consider different life cycle planning strategies when they're developing their asset management plans. Adjusting the models to explore the potential impact of new materials or changes to traffic patterns is a significant effort, and it's one that people don't have the time or the confidence to do. So, as a result, agencies don't really have a very good idea of the potential impacts that these changes can bring, whether they're negative or positive. We also need to improve our confidence in asset management data and analysis results. We need to take steps to make the data collection process more reliable. We need to spend time evaluating the reasonableness of the models, and we need to make sure that practitioners have the skills needed to operate and understand these systems. At the same time, we need to be able to quickly assess the role technology can play in improving the quality of the data that's being used to inform decisions. The third priority area is policy and governance alignment. We're fortunate right now that we have a highway bill that's supportive of asset management. That legislation has had a significant impact on the use of asset management in the United States, but we can't count on the permanence of that legislation. That means we have to better communicate the benefits of asset management so agencies continue to prioritize long-term solutions over short-term, less cost-effective strategies. Some agencies have ensured the sustainability of asset management by adopting policies and directives that specifically state that asset management will drive preservation decisions. Perhaps if you don't have a policy in place, this is a good time to try to get similar policies there before changes are made at the national level that might impact asset management's use. And we need to find ways to better communicate the value of asset management in our organizations. I can't imagine a transportation agency with limited resources effectively managing its network without asset management. We've got to get agency leadership to put a value on asset management data and analysis results that are needed to support asset management. We've got to get them to realize that they can't be effective without a strong asset management program. But as I've already said, we also can't present this information in traditional formats. We need to be more creative in our messaging, and tools like Power BI and data storytelling show promise for presenting complex information in clear and compelling ways. I purposely saved workforce and knowledge continuity to the end because I think it's really going to be critical to asset management's future. Today's agencies are moving new hires without a lot of experience into positions of responsibility more quickly than in the past. This is necessary to fill the positions of those who are retiring or leaving agencies for other opportunities. We need to figure out how to support people who are put in these positions, whether it's through micro training, where small digital bursts of information are conveyed, or virtual reality simulations, YouTube videos, peer exchanges, process documentation, or some other method that I haven't thought of. Several years ago, Federal Highway Administration paid for the introductory asset management course offered through the National Highway Institute to any agency that was interested. That effort had a huge impact on workforce development in at least 30 state DOTs. Unfortunately, Federal Highway Administration hasn't been able to offer that level of training recently, but perhaps that's something that could be resurrected in the future. Whatever format is used for the training, it has to address more than just the technical topics to really help people succeed. I can't stress enough how important communication and data visualization skills are going to be to help asset management thrive. We also have to recognize that the workplace will be made up of people with skills other than engineering and planning. So we need to identify ways to help these people with different backgrounds thrive in transportation. From a TRB session in 2005, the one with DOT HR managers, they said that the majority of the people that they're interacting with never thought of transportation as a career choice. We need to change that and help them see that they can have a thriving career in transportation. But it's going to be up to the DOTs to invest in both the talent and a culture that can be adaptable to the complex environment that they're operating within. We also can't underestimate the benefits of peer-to-peer exchanges of information. Over and over, I've heard practitioners say that peer-to-peer networking and conferences are two of the most valuable sources of learning. Being able to share experiences with peers helps you realize that you're not alone in some of the challenges that you're facing. These are opportunities to build a network and learn about new and innovative approaches to try. I challenge you to continue to find ways for peer exchanges and conferences to continue. So, boiling that down, I think there are 6 things to focus on. First, invest in the diverse talents and a dynamic culture and help to ensure that they succeed in a career in transportation. Be nimbler so we can adapt to changes that are taking place. Turn data into useful information so we can better tell our story. Improve confidence in data and tools so we can adapt to the changes that we need to our models and systems. Take a chance, try something new with calculated risks. And finally, communicate asset management's value to help it remain a priority. In closing, I think that the opportunities for helping asset management thrive are there. We just need people who will move them forward. Whether you're new to the community or one of the old timers, I hope you'll be one of the catalysts, someone who sees the possibilities and makes them happen. That's the real key to making sure that asset management thrives. And I look forward to seeing where you take it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie, for your wisdom and sharing of your knowledge. So we're fortunate to have a panel of asset management practitioners to discuss their key takeaways from your speech and develop a responsive dialogue on where TAM goes from here. So let's have all of the panelists turn on their videos and come onto the screen, and let's get started with Jamie.
Well, thank you, Katie. I really enjoyed listening to this both times. I think I may have pulled out more things even hearing it the second time around than the first, but this all kind of forces you to step back and think about asset management, not just as what we do day to day, but whether what we've built is actually sustainable moving forward. So there are 2 points that really stood out to me, especially about what we're dealing with at Del Dot. So the first is around institutional knowledge and workforce continuity. You talked about how we're seeing a shift where newer staff are stepping into roles much earlier in their careers, while at the same time we're losing a lot of experienced staff. And the real risk isn't just losing knowledge, it's not even realizing what knowledge is missing. And that really sticks with me because you don't know what you don't know. So we have several individuals who have been heavily involved in building our asset management program, developing our TAMP, and they're going to be retiring over the next few years. These people, they understand not just what the data and tools are, but the history behind those decisions, the context, the trade-offs, and what has or has not worked in the past. So I think Zelda has been very intentional in how they've responded to that. And one of the biggest steps that they've taken was creating a dedicated asset management section, which is why I am here along with Deirdre Wallace and Alicia Howard. And that's really been important for us in terms of centralizing knowledge, improving consistency, making sure asset management remains a core function across the agency. And then the other piece is training. I know you mentioned that. We're really excited about by the ATTS Asset Management course series that's being developed through CBM Subcommittee on Asset Management. That's going to be a big help, not just for onboarding new staff, but for continuing to build skills over time. What's great about it is that it's not just a one-time training. It's designed to support your new staff coming in while also building into more advanced topics over time. And that kind of structured learning is exactly what we need right now because we don't have the ability to let people learn over time the way we used to. We need to accelerate that knowledge transfer and do it in a way that sticks. And the second point that stood out to me was technological adaptability. Your keynote touched on how there's no shortage of technology available, but agencies aren't always set up to adopt it quickly or effectively. And I think that's something a lot of us can relate to. We're currently in the process of preparing an RFP for a new enterprise asset management system, and this really ties directly to that point. Our current systems, and we all have multiple systems, they've evolved over time, and like many agencies, they can be a bit siloed. So what we're trying to do now is take a more integrated, forward-looking approach, something that allows us to better connect data across asset types, support risk-based decision-making, and really get more value out of the data we're already collecting. But the technology itself is only part of it. The bigger challenge, and this came through clearly in your speech, is being nimble enough as an organization to actually adopt and use the technology effectively. That means thinking about training, change management, making sure the system aligns with how we do business. It also means making sure staff are comfortable enough with the tools to question the outputs, understand the limitations, and not just take results at face value. And honestly, this ties back to the first point because even with the best technology, it won't help us if we don't have the workforce and knowledge base to support it. So for me, these two ideas are really connected. We're trying to address both at the same time by strengthening our internal structure, supporting workforce development, and planning for the next generation of systems. Because at the end of the day, resilience and asset management isn't about the assets. It's about whether we as an organization are set up to adapt, learn, and move forward. And that's really what's going to determine whether we just maintain what we have or actually improve it over time.
Justin.
Okay. Katie's presentation was really well constructed and, quite frankly, better delivered. She covered a lot of ground. So I just want to highlight it and expand kind of a few points she made in her presentation around stakeholder buy-in and leadership. So early on, Katie mentioned Fred's work and noted one of his reasons for success was generating stakeholder buy-in. And we've all heard of that term. But you want your product end users not only to use the product, but actually believe in and trust those outputs. And that's no small feat. I think that's absolutely achievable. And I believe this is also tied to another one of our key points, which is that system flexibility. So she noted from her perspective, she sees an unwillingness for people to change their models. And quite frankly, I can't agree more. I believe this unwillingness, or in some cases, inability to change the DOT's models and modify the asset management systems to suit the end user goals is one of the biggest challenges our industry faces to achieve that stakeholder buy-in, right? If you can't replicate what's happening, it's difficult to forecast accurately. So even with these like sophisticated tools, buy-in, like even if you had the best thing in the world going, buy-in is still difficult. So from my perspective at the DOT, stakeholder buy-in is probably our number one measurement as to how we measure success internally, and development work at our internal releases are prioritized by stakeholder buy-in, which for us, that usually translates to accuracy improvements. As our budgets shrink and that workforce turns over and leadership identifies new priorities, I don't believe anyone will continue to invest in products or systems that can't achieve that full stakeholder buy-in. So I think buy-in is really important. Moving the leadership portion of this, for our current future leaders out there, Katie has done a spectacular job of highlighting some of the industry trends and core competencies that we need to be aware of. A few of the highlights include that technology adaptability. So I completely agree with Katie that in simple terms, we need to really embrace the technology. We're faced with shrinking workforce and varying skill sets and loss of institutional knowledge. And we need to get creative in how to fill those knowledge gaps with job aids and on-demand training. Um, from a workforce development perspective, we need to recognize the opportunity it creates. You may have less vacancies to fill due to changes in technology. Maybe your less vacancies means you need less field inspectors. So consider using those vacancies to augment your team with possibly data scientists. From a communication perspective, we need to effectively communicate asset management's value to our peers and executive leadership. I think that, again, as engineers, we do a bad job of this. We really need to find better ways to effectively communicate value, particularly that of preservation. I completely agree. We have such a difficult time communicating the value of preservation clearly and effectively. We can't do that without high confidence in our tools and our outputs. And you also need to be that achieve that stakeholder buy-in internally. And finally, my favorite is that be nimbler, right? I believe we're coming to an end of the era of that 3 to 7 year business project cycle. So we're moving more toward a 12-month return on investment. In a world of uncertain future funding, that ROI needs to be realized sooner than later and clearly justified. So as a leader, being nimble means making investments in things that fit into a managed risk, high reward category. And a good example of that is, for us anyway, here at PennDOT, we're looking at bridge inspection QC. You're not going to replace the physical inspector anytime soon, but you can get a machine to review what they've written in an inspection record and compare that to previous ones and highlight any potential problems. This type of investment eliminates a significant amount of overhead, right? While also containing the risk because the inspections still happen. But you effectively increase productivity and allowing you to use the excess human capital on higher demand business functions. It just makes you a little more efficient. So they're my quick thoughts. I think I'll turn it over to Matt.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thanks again, Katie, for your wonderful message. This was the second time I was able to hear it because I was at the conference. And I remember sitting there listening to you and thinking, wow, this is all very real because I'm probably, I'd say, one of the newer people involved in asset management. But I want to just build on what everyone else said. And this word nimble keeps coming up, and it's going to come up in my notes as well. But I want to just focus on your point about economic stability and particularly the data part, because that's something that is really important to me. And I know it's really important to asset management. But as I listened to you, I was thinking, data really comes at a price, and that ROI is very important. We need to process the data, store it, needs to be analyzed. And then got me thinking that, well, what is the data that we actually need? And that's where the nimbleness comes in. And you made a statement about, looking at things, doing things because this is the way we've always been, that it's always been done. And I think that's where we need to be able to think about, even from a data perspective, being agile. What are the priorities? And listening to, other parts of your speech with, what are agency priorities or leadership priorities? Because I think we can always connect every aspect of what we do at a DOT back to asset management. It's just figuring out how we present that. When we were at the conference, we did an exercise on data visualization. And I think, like Justin was saying too, you can have a lot of data and you can present that to people and they may not understand what it means. Then nobody really receives that message that the data is actually trying to say. So I was thinking, how do we present this better in a way that people actually understand it? And I wrestled with that myself personally, going through the TAM update this year. But we need to continue to demonstrate why what we do works. There's changing funding priorities, differing needs that are happening even at like a legislative level. But we have to continue to stay the course and demonstrate why this works. Um, and maybe we have to take a different approach on how we do it. I watched a video recently about a bridge in Washington that was built in the 1960s. And maybe once or twice in a 10-minute video did anybody mention data, but it was the way that it was presented. But it was all based on asset management. It was just how that information was presented, and it made sense to the people who don't work in asset management every day and don't understand all the techniques and tools and the technical stuff that we do. Um, so I would say, innovation is a big key that us as asset management practitioners really need to think about for the future. Not only the innovation, but also how do we implement that? And, asset management's not done in a vacuum, and we can't just rely on what's already in place. But, for folks like me who are new in this newish, we just need to continue to think about how we do that innovatively. And, honestly, doing things like what we're doing today and the peer exchanges, as you mentioned, have are very beneficial in being able to do that. Because I'm just out here in Washington all alone here, and I really rely on my peers to help out with that because y'all have a lot of good ideas. So thanks again.
Mike.
Cool. So it's interesting listening to Katie's speech, and knowing the deep history that she has with asset management going back, one of the OGs, right? And I've been lucky to be doing this for about 25 years now, payment management and then asset management. And one of the things that we ran into, and I'm going to tell you a story to make a contrast, right? So one of the things that we ran into when we first deployed our first payment management system here at NISDOT, it was the first thing I needed to do when I went out to everybody. I said, what this does is it predicts deterioration rates of the pavement, and it actually gives you recommendations for treatments, but it does not replace engineering judgment. It is not a black box that is going to tell you what to do. Beep, boop, do this, right? And I had to get that message across to a lot of people when we first deployed a system where you would put data in and get results out. Because the feeling was that it was taking over some of that engineering judgment, right? And I immediately told everybody, yes, it is. And no, it's not. Yes, it is, insofar as it's built on all of your design manuals and this, the stuff that you have written down. I just put it in the code, right? But there's a bunch of factors that are hard to model, right? So in the beginning, what we were looking at with return on investment for do this treatment versus that treatment was what's the area under the curve for your benefit and what goes into the benefit. In the beginning, it was just the change in condition. Maybe you threw in some AEDT. That was it, right? Later on, now we have sophisticated models that are bringing in all these other things. These factors that are hard to model are now things that we're incorporating into our payment management system. Things like criticality, looking at resilience, right? And again, it's one of those things where you don't want the model to come across, or any kind of strategy to come across, as a black box. So the large amount of my job now when it comes to outreach is explaining and justifying is a strong word, but explaining the output from these models to people that may not be totally ingrained in the asset management philosophy and know what's going on in the background. I love a good peer exchange because I steal a lot of ideas from a lot of smart people, but I'm also talking to other people that speak my language. When I come back here and I have to proselytize asset management to other people that they may not understand it. So I really have to change the way that I approach the problem, right? One of the major things that we've been able to do here that I think is really exciting is we've been able to pull in these factors that are hard to model, criticality, resilience, other things that wouldn't normally be considered as part of a benefit curve 20, 15 years ago. And the three ways that you can get your model to account for those things would be you either adjust the work type, the recommendation, you adjust the benefit calculation in your benefit calculation, your ROI, or you adjust the priority of that location because of other factors, right? And what happens is that we have found over time that depending on the type of asset management analysis we're doing, what goes into that ROI calculation may change based on the pot of funding available, right? The requirements and the objectives from downtown. And one of the nice things about having an asset management framework is it still allows you to have a strong foundation of a data informed decision making methodology that doesn't revolve around guy downtown said we're going to do this bridge, so I guess we're doing it, right? And that means something, right? That means a lot as far as I'm concerned. Right? The downside is that, and we brushed upon this, system adaptability. A lot of vendors out there will sell you the perfect system. It's enterprise wide. Getting changes into those systems quickly in order to deal with the very funding issues, the different ways to look at ROI, very hard, right? And so what we found is when we try to incorporate these things, we're actually doing this outside of our monolithic payment management system. We're doing it in, we get the output, we put it into another factor, we throw the information in. There you go. Sometimes we can go in the back and make the changes. But it's interesting because, again, 15 years ago, I was just happy to have a model that said, what are the conditions going to be next year? And what kind of some treatments should we do? And now we're looking at advanced models that look at what are we doing with undersized culverts? What are we doing with multiple locations that have been hit by storms? What are we looking at in terms of the criticality of a corridor to the people that live there, as opposed to the asset and the road itself? And that's really exciting and super cool, right? That just shows progress, right? In the beginning, it was, oh my God, it's a black box and we don't know what's in it. And now people are like, can we cram more stuff into this methodology, right? They believe in it. And I find that to be intensely exciting. And that's all I got.
Virginia.
Hello, everyone. Being at New Mexico DOT, I've been here for 5.5 years, and I don't come from a pavement background or a transportation background or an engineering background. And so I'm always taking in a lot of what's said to learn about what's going on in the transportation industry. And one of the things that I've come across over the past 5 years that really was kind of contradictory to Katie's presentation was we talk a lot about money and how there's never enough money to cover everything that we need on our networks. And yet in your talk, Katie, it was really about technology and people, not funding. Now there were some funding pieces, but when it all boiled down, technology and people. And a lot of the weaknesses that you talked about, a lot of them to me come back to communication. So it's been kind of a struggle for me to learn about what goes on here and take asset management principles and apply them to transportation. Things like adaptability, flexibility, alignment, and continuity all get better when people talk to each other in a clear and consistent way. And I found that includes subject matter experts talking to executives or engineers talking to the public, IT staff talking with other managers, and the folks that are making decisions over here at our general office to the folks who are actually doing the work on the ground. When we started working on our 2026 Transportation Asset Management Plan, we realized two big things about communication at NMDOT. The first is that we have trouble dealing with funding uncertainties, and we have to make a better effort, and we have to get better at talking to the public and the legislature about transportation needs, and whether those needs are really a project level need or a network level need. We need to have a clear and simple message about what we're trying to say and what happens if the funding is inconsistent or too low. And without that, it's hard for anyone outside the Asset Management Bureau or about DOT to understand what the stakes really are. And the second thing we realized is that communication issue isn't just between us and everybody out there, it's within the Department of Transportation. We all need to be on the same page and moving toward the same goals. And right now, a lot of our work is siloed, which means we don't always see how our decisions affect other areas or how their decision affects us. And so breaking down those silos is a big part of becoming more coordinated and effective organization. So what this really all brought together to me and with Katie's talk is that communication is not a soft skill. And so, we all say we want to get better at communication, but we treat it as though it's something that everybody just knows how to do, or you take a LinkedIn learning class and you can just get better at it. And it's something that we rely on every day to make our department function internally, as well as to communicate with the public or with our legislature. When we communicate clearly with the public and the legislature, we build trust, which I think Justin talked about. We help people understand what's going on, which I think everybody has talked about. And then when we communicate internally, we reduce confusion, avoid duplication, and move towards shared outcomes. I think I completely agree that technology and people are top priorities, but for me, it's communication that ties that all together. And if we want a stronger, more adaptable, more resilient DOT, for us, that's really where the work starts. And I think one of the big issues in that is that we hire data analysts, and we hire pavement analysts, and we hire engineers, and we've got a lot of really good experts in a lot of really important areas. But the only communication people that we have at our DOT are in the PR department, or maybe in the training department. And so to really treat communication as another skill that's needed within our asset management program, for me, raises that to a higher level, because I'm not going to be an expert in communication, and I don't really expect a lot of my engineers to, or a lot of my data analysts. And so the peer exchange do a lot to give us ideas on how to do that, but to really get into the theory of communication and all of those things, I think, as I said earlier, not treating it as just a soft skill that everybody can do, but treating it as something that we definitely need for asset management will make a big difference at NMDOT. Thank you.
Thank you all. Katie, would you like to say something in response? There are a couple of questions in the chat too, but we can go to that after you if you'd like to say something.
Yeah, no, I got some good feedback in terms of some of the priorities, and the nimbleness, the adaptability of people to adapt to the new technology seems to be a big issue. And then again, the workforce, no surprise. But the communication is one that I've been especially interested in the past, say, year and a half, something like that. That's a big one. And I thought that at the conference, the peer exchange, when they did the peer exchange and they brought together some examples of graphics that had been in asset management plans, and they put them up on the screen and gave you a minute or two to figure out what it was saying to you. And even some of the ones that we had put together, it's like, now wait a minute, what is that showing? So it was a really good illustration, I think, of, we think we're communicating effectively, we think we're showing something, but we're not doing it very effectively. And I think that would be a really valuable thing. I don't know if you guys did a webinar on that, but it was a really good, humbling experience to go through that.
We can bring Mike back for that.
Yeah, and have him look at that. And then, just taking other examples from other fields to, show you can communicate something. You can communicate your point. What is the point you're trying to communicate? And what is the most effective way of doing that? And we miss the main point by covering up with all these other things that we have to show on the same graphic that just that detract from it. So it was interesting to hear Virginia's read on that thing too. But I think that's going to be a key.
Yeah, thanks. Christos, do you want to share your comment?
Sure. Katie, again, thank you so much for the great presentation. Always loved your feedback on this, and to really see such a stellar career supporting so many agencies, and the entire country, through TRB. But you hit something that it really touches, very close to some of the work that we are doing through PRC's, through our committee on the Transport Agency of the Future, and having community and citizens as our North Star, when you mention about the, community-based performance measures. So, and would really love to hear more about the idea and the concept of, some high vision community-based performance measures that can show the value of transportation. Because really the only time that people recognize the value of transportation is when it breaks down and it doesn't work. So how can we change that?
Yeah, and again, this is another one that's a fairly politically touchy subject right now. But a year or so ago, a year and a half ago, there were studies that were trying to look at this. What are some other measures that could be used? And, access to transportation is a metric. Somebody could be 10 minutes from a form of community or some method of being able to move from one place to another, be it transit, train, rail, whatever the mode of transportation would be, but there is certain distance from it. And there have been a number of agencies, and Jamie, I don't know if you can talk to it. Delaware has done a lot of work in this area, but putting together different data sets that show, say, pavement conditions overlaid with social economic factors to see where some of those things are overlapping. And that's something that we hadn't really done in our traditional management systems, is to look at those things, but not focusing so much on the vehicles, but maybe the number of people that are being impacted by some of the conditions in agencies. I don't have an answer for you, Christos, in terms of what is the measure that we should be using. But I have a feeling that it's not going to be just conditions, pavement conditions. I think it has to incorporate some of these social economic kinds of things also to tell us a real story.
I think
I think just to add to that, Katie, and I had a conversation earlier today with someone else, and we were particularly talking about, for example, public transport allows people to get to jobs, right? Someone who, without that, they might not have been able to go to college because the only way they could have made it to college was through public transport. But the same can actually be expanded to road transportation, where without roads, you really cannot get to places, whether it's a job, whether it's, shopping or, and that, going to the hospital, going to school, all of that provides value to our society. And current administration priorities aside, I think we owe it to ourselves to find ways to continue working on this theme and not, push a pause for the next 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And things just as simple as the availability of a sidewalk. I mean, a safety enhancement that could take place if there aren't sidewalks and kids are getting to school and they have to walk in the road in order to get to school. That's a safety issue. So, the availability of sidewalks, crosswalks that are protected in the middle, all of those kinds of things. So I think the answer is that it's not one metric that we are going to be looking at. I think it's going to be a mix of metrics.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Christos. Also, I think Abe Muakat is not on the webinar anymore, but his comment is related to this. He's, I think, struggling with kind of the frameworks we have to support stronger decision making, and asking the question of, what's the value of assets to a community as a yardstick for things like trade-offs and inclusion of user costs, impacts of various activities on each other. So I think it is that ecosystem. Ting, are you still on? I think you might be, if you want to share.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Katie. That was very inspiring. I was especially drawn to your points about technological adaptabilities. Sorry. Also, a few other panelists mentioned about innovation or exploration of using AI for bridge inspection, for example. I'm super into technology, and I think not only how we do asset management tools, methods have been evolving, but also how we get those asset data. So personally, I have been interested in exploring emerging technologies like LiDAR, like camera-based technology or other type of sensor to get us more asset information at a lower cost at higher frequency. Just curious to hear from you, what's your thought on how should agencies and practitioners think about the value and the long-term role of this emerging technologies versus the more traditional, more like engineering level inspections of asset data. To be candid, I've been approached by quite a few vendors. Like I'm like overwhelmed. Oh my God, like how should I compare all these technologies, and everyone claims that their data will be 95% accurate. How can I verify their statements?
Wow.
Thank you.
That one, I bet some of the other panel members can help with this one too. But I'd like, one of the things that I try to strive against is fighting a fire. You know, like I try to think of it from a process perspective rather than, you know, somebody else brings something to me and now I have to react to it. And so I would say that the first question is, you know, what is it that the agency needs to change? Like, is there a problem in the area where they're bringing you the technology? Is there a reason or a focus on why that is something that you even want to consider? So, you know, don't let them drive the train. Make sure you know where you want to go. And so how high a priority is this? And, you know, what are some of the risks associated with it? What are the potential benefits from it? And I would bring a multi-team, multidisciplinary team to the problem of trying to help address this. I think I saw that Brad Allen was on the call. A couple of years ago, there was an NCHRP study that was done to help agencies address some of these innovative technologies. How can an agency address that as an organization? And they did some practice studies in South Dakota, Utah, and Idaho to test the approach, the framework that was developed to help you think through some of these things and set priorities for which technologies are worth actually looking into from an agency perspective. And I'm hoping that if he's still on, he can write the NCHRP number in the chat or something. But I would say that the way to do it is, if it is an area where you really think there is potential for improvement, is there a way that you can test it? Can you do some sort of a pilot? Can you compare a number of different technologies and compare the results from that to see what are the hardships that you would have to deal with? What are the benefits that you would get from it? How realistic is it? What are some of the other, you know, considerations that would have to be taken into account? But I would put it on the vendor to demonstrate to you what those things would be. All the other panelists, I'm sure, have dealt with this kind of thing because people come at you all the time. So what would be some of the advice you would offer to Ting?
So I want to piggyback on that. Yeah, you definitely want to avail yourself of any type of pilots or proof of concepts that you can. We do a lot of those in New York because everyone will come in and say, my stuff's super accurate. And then you actually look at it and you're like, well, it's kind of accurate. The other thing that I would really caution when you're looking as an organization about buying a new data stream is you can buy data. It may be the best data in the world. If you don't have a pipeline to bring that data to the decision makers so that they can use it, you don't buy it. Get that part in place first, right? Think about how it's going to work, how it's going to fit into your workflow.
Value add.
Right. And then, yeah, once you have that, then now you come from a position of strength. I know what I want. I know how it's going to get used. Now you go and find a vendor who's going to give it to you, as opposed to the other way around. You know, that's what I got.
Yeah, and to add with
Can I-
Mike. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Sorry, Justin. I was just, that triggered one thing in my head, Mike. It's that now it's gone. Yeah. But
Retirement's
the thing
that
is,
good, huh?
now the thing is that there are some technologies that can improve a lot. I've seen this with model. Like, you can do some much better modeling that are much more accurate, but they don't make any difference in the final recommendation. So why go through that process if they're not going to make a change in the end result kind of thing. So that is a practical thing that I've seen. Sorry, Justin.
It's okay. She was specifically referencing bridge inspection, and there's a couple just finer points we need to hit on that. Until you can get a machine or a robot to sound something, there's really not a lot of value added they can give you. Okay, so just keep that in mind, because hitting something with a hammer is incredibly valuable for the inspector. Okay, it's a thing, and until you can get a machine to do that, they can't replace the information that you obtain from that. And it's just unfortunately the way it goes. Now, from the pavement perspective, there's considerably more options out there as we start to crowdsource data, as we start to look at all the vehicle data that's coming in. I just had a meeting with some folks that are showing me what they can provide me for a very little cost from vehicle sensor data, from wheel sensor data. It's amazing. It's not survey quality, but it's quantity, and it's quantity that's cheap. So can I use that to add to my value stream, right? What does it provide me? Can I get like I can look at 2 weeks ago, we had a pothole open up on this road. It shows up on the map and it's near instant, right? It would take me 2 years to find that from a survey vehicle, right? But it's not survey level data. So all these nuances you have to be aware of. But again, back to your bridge inspection, just make sure that they're providing useful information and that will provide a value add.
All right, I think we're gonna not have time to hear from Ronald Lau, who's asking about what are we doing wrong compared to Japan, where the pavement condition is much better than what we have. And Brad has posted the reference to the
Thank you, Brett.
NCHRP. Yeah. And so thank you again to Katie and all of our panelists. We really appreciate your taking the time to share your knowledge. The next TAM webinar will be held on Wednesday, July 15th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and the topic will be organization, leadership, and culture change. I think very appropriate follow-on to this webinar. More information will be provided as it gets closer to the date of the webinar. You can check that out on tam-portal.com. Hope you will be able to join us, and we'll continue to hold these webinars every 2 months, and then the other months are the TPM webinars. So every month, CPPM is sponsoring a webinar, TPM and TAM alternating. And so thank you, everybody.